Hey, what's up, everybody? So it's kind of a momentous occasion in this 1949 replay. We finally have reached the halfway point in May, which means, as you probably already know, that Don Newcombe has finally arrived with the Brooklyn Dodgers. I've been talking for a while about how the Dodgers really need some help, how they got off to a really bad start in the season. In the replay, though, they've actually won 7 games in a row before today's game start. They won one that was off camera again behind Don Newcombe for their 8th victory. And I'll tell you, it's going to be really hard for other teams to compete with the Dodgers as long as they have Newcombe, which they will for the rest of the season. The question, though, is whether they can pick up the 5.5 or so games that they're behind the Giants and the Pirates. So we'll see what happens. It's still a very young season, and there still is a lot of baseball to be played. But I did think I would slow down a little bit and sort of talk with you a little bit about what it means for Newcombe to come on. Now, it's always difficult to talk about some of this stuff because of a lot of the pain and sort of animosity that's associated with things that happened in the past. We all know about Jackie Robinson breaking the gentleman's agreement, color barrier, and all that stuff in 1947. Well, in 1949, the thing that people won't tell you much about is that there definitely was still a big amount of discrimination that black athletes had to face in Major League Baseball. I mean, it's to the point where Newcombe, who pitched really well in Montreal in 1948, was clearly good enough to start on the Dodgers, but Branch Rickey decided to keep him in the minor leagues because he was worried that there would be too many black players on the big club among Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella. Finally, here in the middle of May, they finally decided to allow Newcombe to come up to the big league. You can see here, this is from the Sabre Biography Project. When the 1949 season arrived, Newcombe was certain that he'd be heading north with the Brooklyn Dodgers. But even though he pitched well during spring training, the Dodgers decided to allow him to return him to the minors at the beginning of the year to mature. And it was Bert Schotten who said that Newcombe was a fire eater who couldn't keep his mouth shut, and that they didn't want Newcombe to spoil it for the other 2 black players, which is a pretty rough and, mean-spirited thing to say. And it's awful because you wonder how good the Dodgers would have been if they had their best pitcher for the first month of the season, right? So there's a lot of questions here. If you're going to do your own 1949 replay and you're okay with some counterfactualism, or you're playing like OOTP or whatever, you might want to bring Newcombe up at the beginning of the season and sort of see what he can do. He's clearly the best pitcher in the entire National League, right? There's no question about it. Firebrand or not, he was competitive and he was fierce. He was a great pitcher. Anyway, so I wanted to give you a little preview of something I'm going to write about that's going to take a while for this to show up. So I've gone through and found a few newspapers about the subject. This is from the Gazette in Montreal, May 9th, 1949. I can't see much out of this picture, unfortunately. This is the biggest crowd ever to watch, or the biggest crowd since the war to watch baseball in Montreal came to watch the Royals split a doubleheader. They had 21,000 fans in the 20,000 capacity stadium, which is pretty impressive. Anyway, Don Newcombe started which of those games? He started the opener and went 7 innings and gave up only 2 unearned runs, and then Montreal somehow was able to hold on to the end. So that's on the 8th that he started. Started again on the 13th of May 1949. And here he was a little bit more disappointed because they ended up losing 11-3. He didn't have such a great start this time out. That the paper, at least here, the Montreal Star, was guessing that Newcombe might have been thinking a lot about his coming promotion to Brooklyn, which had just been announced. That's going to be pretty hard to go and start a game right after you've heard that you're going to wind up going to Brooklyn. So anyway, that's the way that it ended for Newcombe here in Montreal. I think he had maybe one more start in the season before this. The International League was a little bit behind the major leagues in 1949, so it's not like he accumulated a huge amount of statistics. In fact, if you look over at Baseball Reference, you'll notice that there are no minor league statistics for Newcombe in 1949. That doesn't mean that he didn't play. That just means that he didn't have enough innings to have his statistics published in the Sporting News Baseball Guide that year, the 1950 guide, which it's the 51 guide I have back here. I have the 1950 guide somewhere on my computer. And here we are back to the Montreal Gazette. talking about the same game. And here, the story is that Don Newcombe might be recalled by the Dodgers that had broken that afternoon. Now, it's natural for this to be a big story in Montreal because, he was clearly the star pitcher of the Montreal team. Here you go, Newcombe to get his chance and so on and so forth. Actually, though, it was also huge news in Brooklyn. In fact, this story, believe it or not, is the story of the Dodgers-Braves game on May 13th. And the first part of the story is all about how Newcombe is going to come up. In desperation, Branch Rickey is bringing up Don Newcombe. And, who else? Old Barney asked in surprise. This is a Birdshot, and he has the makings of a great pitcher and is sure to give us the pitching we need badly. I heard something about him coming up in the club councils, but I didn't know it was going to happen so soon. Yeah, it's pretty obvious that the Dodgers needed to have him come up if they were going to compete. I mean, they didn't win the pennant, of course, in 1948, and they weren't exactly off to the best start in 49. In fact, they lost this game 6-5, giving up an extra inning run in the 10th, I believe. And so, by this point, they're 12-11, only 2 games behind New York and Boston for the lead in the National League, but still not playing quite as well as they could have. So it's pretty obvious that if you've got a guy who's a superstar and later Hall of Famer in the minor leagues, you might as well pull him up. And then, of course, this is from the day that he did come up, and there is his picture in the paper, even though he didn't appear in this game. In fact, it's not until the 20th that he pitched, because remember that he had just pitched on the 13th, and you've got to travel from Montreal to Brooklyn. It's not exactly going next door. But that gives you sort of an idea of this. This wasn't, like some little deal that was going on or nobody ever heard of this guy. Don Newcombe was a pretty big name already in Brooklyn and in baseball by this time, was pretty well recognized in the minor leagues. And him going up to the Dodgers was a pretty major news story, I would say. With all of this coverage, at least in the Brooklyn newspapers that we have access to. I haven't looked yet to see if there's anything more in like the New York papers or anything. I imagine that the Sporting News probably covered this in some detail. Now, I will warn you, and this is what you're going to see as when I write about this in the blog, which is probably going to be in a couple of months, honestly, considering the disconnect in time between the YouTube channel and the blog. When I do write this up, though, I've got to warn you that the content of some of these articles is not extraordinarily racially sensitive. Even in Brooklyn, New York, still there was a lot of stuff that was being said that is really not appropriate and is not right. So be on the lookout for that. That's one of those things you've got to sort of deal with when you deal with newspapers and so on from this era, which is the fact that you're not going to be able to just like wipe out the racial prejudice that clearly existed in society back even after the Second World War. It's one of those things that kind of lingered around for a while, and it can be very cringeworthy to read. So keep that in mind, and we'll do what we can to go through with this. My personal opinion, as I've said before, really is that Newcombe probably should have, not probably, but almost absolutely certainly should have been brought up at the beginning of the season. It's absolutely ridiculous for them to keep him in the minor leagues when he was clearly good enough to be the ace of the staff. Completely bizarre decision, but this is, the same club as we've talked about before that decided to bring up what's his name over in left field and was doing all sorts of crazy stuff at the beginning of the season. I understand it. I know that it's difficult, to see like ahead of time who's going to be successful and who's not. But in this case, as much as we like to talk about how great it was that Branch Rickey took the chance on Jackie Robinson and all this other stuff, the actual history behind it shows that there was still a lot of racial prejudice that was going on, and there were a lot of decisions that were being made that, in retrospect, look absolutely stupid. For this one, really, Newcombe should have been brought up. I'm guessing it was probably too late in 48 to bring him up by the end of the season, but at the beginning of 49, they absolutely should have brought him up, and it would have probably changed history. It probably wouldn't have been much of a pennant race that year if they had done so. So, we'll see what happens, and we'll see what implications it has for the pennant race. Love to know what you think about it, and I'll talk.